yourself into the shoes of children or into the shoes of parents who had to send their children away to another country, which language they didn't speak, to save their lives. I know from this Kindertransport, and I'm a member of the Kindertransport Association here, there were 40% of the children that came out that never saw their parents again. So it was a very, very difficult life for all of us. They were luckier than I was, and I'll explain that to you. And let me get to Germany before I get to England. Imagine a railway station, and we were 150 children, but we were transports, we all had to come from different areas to Cologne. So there were a lot of tears shed between parents and children to say goodbye. The children didn't know anything, but the parents were wondering if they would ever see their children again. In Cologne, we met the leader and we got onto another train and we started out. We had to go through Holland, to go through the Hook of Holland to get a boat to go to England. But it wasn't that easy. Number one, as you know, when you go with your parents on a long car trip, are we there yet? That's I will never forget. I think I hear that in my dreams. Well, we weren't there yet. But they were lucky. They were younger. I was the oldest. And when we got to the border of Germany in Aachen, they took me off the train. They strip searched me. I don't want to explain to you what strip searching is. Some might have heard what it is, but others don't. And I think you're too young, really. And they told me if I don't hurry up, the train will leave without me. Well, I made it back on the train, and the train took off. And there was a lot of crying. And the funny part of it was the boys thought they were going on to something exciting, not the girls. The girls were more attached to the mother, and they were very subdued, and some were crying. All we were allowed to take with us was a suitcase this big. Okay? They didn't care what we had in it. I took a prayer book, my prayer book. I don't even remember what. I remember the prayer book because it's in Washington in the museum, in the Holocaust Museum. I don't remember what else I took that was that important to me. I was older already. Most probably some books and things. But some took toys, beloved toys. Some took, the blankets that you get attached to when you're small. That's what they took. And the British wanted to commemorate the thing. And they have in two stations, they have monuments of the small children with a little suitcase with a doll holding on the doll. It's done so well. It's exactly, I can see it when I close my eyes, I can see it. So we got to Holland, and along the train came women from, I don't know where they were from. They were Dutch. They most probably were Jewish, but I'm not sure. But they came along the trains, and they had trays, and they had cookies and all goodies for the children. And one couple came along and asked, is there anyone from Bochum? Bochum is in Westphalia, and when I was 2 years old, my parents moved from Düsseldorf to Bochum. That's where my grandparents lived. So they gave me a big box with all kinds of stuff in it. So I was able to give all the children something. And then the train left, and I, as the older one, I heard I let out a big sigh, out of Germany, thank God. So we got on the boat. It's not a boat like you see today. It's a boat more like a ferry that takes you from New York, from Manhattan to Brooklyn, to Staten Island. That's it. And I chucked every child in that night. I never got to sleep. But I wanted to make sure nobody was crying. You know, I was older and I was very mature. For me, that was a beginning of a very lonely life. All the identification we had was a rope, and on the rope was a cardboard, and on the cardboard was a number. I didn't understand what the number was for, but when we got to Harwich in London, in England, no, they had, yeah, I found out in London, not in Harwich. In Harwich there were double-decker buses waiting for us outside that drove us to London. And when we got to London, I don't know what it was, but it was anything to do with a synagogue or church or whatever, but it was a very big hall. And in that hall were a lot of people. And before I tell you what happened in that hall, I've got to explain to you what happened in London. When they found out in London what was going on in Germany, the House of Lords and the House of the Commons, they voted to bring 10,000 children to England. But how to get them and how to do that took a little time. Really not too long, because all this came out, nobody knew what was going on in Europe. But when Crystal Night came, that's when the world knew. And that's when it happened in London. And they decided on it, and they said, anyone paying 50 pounds can, and will keep a child, you got a child. Anyone who had relatives. This transport was mainly relatives, children going to relatives, children going to foster homes. What do you call them? Ja, die leben ganz anders als wir, die Menschen.
The Quakers. Vielleicht die Quakers.
Quakers?
What was
The
that?
Quakers.
Quaker?
The Quakers, yes. The Quakers were one. The different groups that took in children, okay? And on the whole, children were treated very well. But there were others, they weren't doing so well. There were some who were taken in by farmers, who made them work in the field, who really, I don't want to say that abused them. They didn't abuse them, but they used them, okay, when they shouldn't have. So it wasn't easy for anyone. And 16 was the maximum that they took. No one who was 15, 17 years old. So I was the oldest and really got in at the end. And I tell you how I got in. Not knowing, only finding out afterwards. I had a great aunt who had a cousin who was working in London on the committee of these Kindertransports. And she put me on any list. She didn't know what the list was. Otherwise she would have put me on another list. Because as we were in this hall, I realized all of a sudden why the numbers. They were calling numbers. And the people had numbers. And they put the children and the people that had the same number together. And the children got used to me and they didn't know the others, so they were hanging on to my skirts, physically. And it was very, very hard for me to say goodbye to these children, because we've gotten attached and we didn't know. We were together, a group, in a group we were okay, but to go to somebody strange, alone, wasn't easy. Put yourself in that situation, okay? Different ages, to sit from really from birth to 17. We had a dozen children under 1 year. Anyone who's been to Germany knows the trains in Germany. They have a long corridor, and off the corridor they have compartments for 8 people, okay? So I took the babies and I put them on the seats. And that's where they stayed. But I had to look at the others too, so I was so scared. You have no idea. Because with 16 in Germany, you were not an adult. Not at that time. You were still treated like a child. And if I tell you, I had a curfew, 7 o'clock. I had to be in the house. At 9 o'clock, I had to be in bed. Okay? I was 16. I couldn't date. God forbid. Today, you date with 12, 13. It's a different life. We were much more, we weren't coddled because we really were taught a lot. And I learned French in school. I didn't learn English. So, and later on when I got to Canada, I kept my mouth shut. because my children, when they had a secret, they spoke Canadian French to each other. And I had to go in the other room to laugh because they shouldn't. I told them I don't know French. Nobody knew I know French because I think the Canadian French is okay. Anyways, as a matter of fact, I learned English 3 times. I learned the King's English, which was beautiful. I learned the, not the French, the English. The Canadian English and the American English, the 3 different languages. So as I lived in all 3 countries, I had to learn English again. Not only to speak it, but to write it. It's different too. Okay? Example, a check that you write. In England, it's CHEQUE. In Canada, it's, at the time when I lived there, it was still English. Was the same. Here is CHECK. Okay? So it wasn't easy, all I can say. Anyways, to get back, so I said goodbye to the children, and all of a sudden, I'm standing in this big hall alone. Everybody was gone and nobody was there, except me. I said, dear God, what now? And about a quarter of an hour later, somebody came. And they said, I don't remember if it, in England it's always fog. It was foggy and the transportation was delayed or whatever it was. But that quarter of an hour killed me. It really did. I said, is that the kind of life I'm going to have here? I've got no one to protect me. Well, this person was from the committee. And the committee was absolutely fantastic. They took me to a boarding house, and the next day I had to go to the committee, and they sat me down, and they said, they had to find a place for me. I said, what would you like to do? Or to study or whatever. So I said, I always wanted to be a medical doctor, but I know that isn't possible. I said, it would be nice if you could keep me in the medical field and maybe a nurse. So they put me in a hospital as a probationer nurse. I didn't speak any English. They asked me to bring one thing and I brought another thing. 6 months later they told me, you're a limey. A limey is an Englishman that speaks the perfect English. So, here I was. And war broke out. September 1, 1939. I had left Germany February 2nd, 1939. So what happened? War was declared, and within a day or two, London was empty. In England, a lot of children go to boarding schools. The schools were evacuated out to Scotland and Wales. The hospitals were evacuated out of London because they were afraid that they might be bombing. They were afraid for a reason, believe you me. after that happened, oh, I can't forget, these brave people who volunteered to be, what did they call them? ARW, air raid wardens. They were out, and when the sirens went, when they knew that there was some activity overhead somewhere, people had to get off the streets. So they had built in these few months air raid shelters. They had prepared in the private houses and in apartment houses the cellars to be safe. So these air raid wardens got people off the street. Wherever you were pushed into a shelter. And they never mentioned, I don't know why, but I think they should be mentioned together with all the military, because the military got leave sometimes, but these air raid wardens, they were always there. Okay. So what happened in London? People started moving out of houses that didn't have a cellar. They had to go somewhere. And they moved into the subway. Thanks.
Die U-Bahn, ne, sind sie dann ausgewichen, weil U-Bahn ja auch unter der Erde ist und auch mehr Sicherheit dann verspricht, wenn Bomben dann fallen. Ihr müsst bedenken, ne, es war ja lange zurück, nicht jedes Haus hatte immer einen Keller, wo man den Sicherheit bringen kann.
So in these subway stations, they put, you know, from when you have brothers or sisters, you have bunk beds. Well, they weren't bunk beds, they were triple beds, 3 people above each other. And the men used to go to work, and the women used to be in the subway with the children, and they even gave birth in the subway. There were people there that never saw sunlight or any daylight for 6 years, for the whole length of the war. We had two accidents. One, you know, when the sirens went, people had to rush. And our subways here are not really subways. You go down well, there are not too many New Yorkers. I don't know if you know the New York subway or any of the others. They're not very deep. In England, you go down and down and down, very deep, really deep. I would say about 5 floors. And people were rushing. So somebody fell, everybody fell on top, and everybody got asphyxiated in one station. In another station, a bomb, when the sirens went, they had at each end of the platform fire doors where no fire or water or anything could come in. And there was an unexpected, I don't know if somebody didn't hear it or something new came up. Nobody heard the planes coming over. There was no air raid. And a bomb hit a main water main. They all got drowned. They didn't know, they didn't close the doors, so everything rushed in, and within minutes it was gone. Unbelievable. The next thing was that all people that were not born in England had to go to a tribunal. A tribunal is like a court. Imagine you're sitting in front of a judge and you have to answer. You don't have a lawyer speaking for you. You got to answer the questions. And they had 3 categories. A was an enemy alien. B, I don't remember what that was. C, you were free. And I became A. And why did I become A? Because my hospital was in a protected area. It was at the seaside, a place like Atlantic City. And they were afraid that the military might come in through the border. So that was protected area, and you couldn't live there as a foreigner. Oh, before I even, no, after. That was the time we lost our nationality. We became stateless, so we were nothing. We weren't German, we weren't English, we were nothing. And then later, when the concentration camps came the numbers. And to this day, I can't believe Germany was killing millions of people. And they gave them numbers, and they kept book. They kept book like you wouldn't believe. I give you an example. My grandparents had a birthday on the same day, but not in the same year. I never knew how old they were, okay? I didn't even know the numbers. I went to Washington, to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, and I went upstairs in the archives, and they got out the books. And the books are alphabetical. And I found my family there. And I found the birthdays of my grandfather and grandmother. My grandfather had died in 1929, but my grandmother who raised me, she was there. I knew how old she was. And everybody's there. When they were born, when they died, where they died, how they died, or verschollen. So they escaped, and they don't know what happened to them. It's unbelievable. It really, who thought of all these things? It was organized, and would you believe, with all these killings, they kept book. Some people went from one concentration camp to another. Some were able to escape. They were near a wood, or there was somebody, there was one case, somebody brought somebody from outside and inside. Was a young person standing inside, looking out, and it was dark. And another young person came and And they used to meet there every day, and used to bring them something to eat. I can't tell you, I wasn't there, but I've read the stories, I've heard the stories, I hear the stories, I still hear new ones. I belong to a Holocaust women's organization. We meet every month, but they're from all over Europe. It's a lot of Russians. The Russians with the pogroms. My mother-in-law, may she rest in peace, was from Russia. She would never talk about the pogrom. I have never been able to find out what a pogrom was until Fiddler on the Roof. That play showed what a pogrom was. Did any of you see it? Oh, you have to see it. It's playing in Manhattan. Any of you, have your parents taken you to see it? No. It really shows the pogrom. The Russians were brutal. It wasn't Hitler alone. In Italy, it was Mussolini. Japan. Then Germany had a contract with Russia, and then they attacked Russia. Nothing was sacred to them. Everything goes. And I want to tell you something from this day forward. It doesn't matter how old you are, until you die. If you hear somebody say, the Holocaust never happened, you tell them, not true. I met a survivor, and I know what went on. There are a lot of deniers now, and all these old hate. There is so much hate in the world now. It really is terrible. It's like history repeats itself. It was not only World War II, it was World War I, and everything, and everything worse. So you've got to keep your ears open, and don't be afraid to say anything, because you've got to stop these people. They want to convince other people that it never was, because, they're only, from World War II, we're only about, that's my other life. Let me go back, I'll tell you that. Okay. Remember, I went on to a tribunal. So I couldn't stay where I was, by the seaside. So they took me back to London, to a hostel. And a few days later they came, and they picked me up, and they put me on a boat with other people, and took me to the Isle of Man. You ever heard that name? Isle of Man? Yes? Some of you have. Okay. The Isle of Man, for the sake of the others who haven't, the Isle of Man is a beautiful island. It's like a Greek island. It has, when you arrive with the boat, it has downstairs, people lived, and then it has these high cliffs, and way up there is another life. Okay, so when we got off the boat, the boat was terrible. It is in the middle of the Irish Sea, which is always very, very rough. And a lot of people were sick. And I was a nurse, so I had to look after them. And then when we got there in the morning, they put the men downstairs and the women upstairs. So upstairs, like that this island is like, how can I compare it? To what can I compare it? It's a summer resort, really, but people do live there. And so when we got upstairs, there was one hotel next to the other, and we were put into these hotels. And we were told, look after your room, keep it clean, and you have to cook for each other. We didn't have to do any work, nothing. No, I was very lucky because I could continue with my studies in the hospital. So I didn't waste any time. I was there a year. A lot of things happened there. I was befriended by a young woman, and she was Polish. And, well, I was only a kid, really, when you think of it. By that time, I was about 17, going on 18. And today I can tell you when somebody is depressed, but at that time I didn't know enough. And I came to my room one day, and I found a letter on my pillow. And when I read it, I knew what happened. And I immediately called the police, and I said, I have this letter, and I'm suspicious that she might have committed suicide. And they went looking down at the cliffs, and sure enough, they found her. But that wasn't the worst. The worst was that I had to go to the court. I was called to the court. They had to make sure it was a suicide, not a homicide.
Ja, nicht, dass jemand umgebracht hat, sondern dass sie sich selbst umgebracht hat.
So I had to go to this court, and I was asked all these questions. And they finally then made her a suicide. But what impression it made on me, you can imagine. And then being there and not knowing and not hearing from my family and not knowing what was going on. None of us knew what was happening to our family. Before the war started, I used to get mail, but once the war started, I didn't get mail. My dad passed away when I was 7 years old on a flu epidemic within 48 hours. And 10 years later, my mother remarried. That was 3 weeks before I left Germany. And my stepfather was in a concentration camp, and she was able to get him out. You see, what it was, what Hitler wanted. He wanted to get rid of all the Jews. He didn't care if they went on their own, if they left the country. A lot of people went illegally into other countries around Europe, and those who didn't go, they were killed. So my mother got out, and 2 days before war was declared, on the last boat from Holland to Chile, South America. I'm sure you all know, you heard the name of that country. So at least I knew that she got out. We didn't know anything about anybody else. You see, after my dad passed away, my grandmother raised me. So my mother was in another town. So after a year, I was called back to a second tribunal. And I was set free. Oh, but before, I want to tell you something. When my dad was still alive, I had a Kinderfräulein.
Kinderfräulein, a nanny. A nanny.
Yes.
Kinderfräulein. Nanny.
Okay.
She had a nanny.
And I didn't know what happened to her. And there was one hotel that was full of Diakonissen, Schwestern.
Yeah. Nonnen, if you live in a...
Yeah, but not the one.
Yeah.
They worked in the hospitals.
Ja, aber schon Frauen der Kirche.
Ja,
Ne?
ja,
Also
ja,
ja,
ja.
Frauen der Kirche. Ja.
You understand?
Yeah.
Okay. She had a strange name that I never heard, Helma.
Helma.
I don't know if it was a foreign name or what it was, but I've never heard that name in my whole life. And one day, I'm walking on the beach on this Isle of Man, and there were two. There was one of these Schwestern and two children dancing around, and they were yelling, "Helma, Helma, Helma." I said, "Helma." So I walked around in front, and I stood there and I looked at her, and she looked at me, and she says, "My name used to be Hannelore." So in Germany, during the war, I was going to have a German name. And one of my aunt's name was Hannah. She went too in the concentration camp. So I took her name. She said, "Hannelore?" I said, "Yes, Helma." I didn't know she was in England. I didn't even know she was a diaconess, because with me she was alone. But this was about 10, 11 years later. So when she left me, she was probably, I don't know. I was glad to see her alive. Okay. When a year later, I was called to another tribunal and set free. But they told me, "You can't go back to London. You've got to go to Manchester." And Manchester was a hostel, and I met a couple of my friends from Germany there too. But I continued with my studies and then sat with the exam till I got my RN. RN is registered nurse, okay? So then I said to myself, what am I going to do now? I said, okay, England saved my life. I got to do something for England. So I joined the army. And when I joined the army, I still had to fight. Why? The commanding officer told me at the first interview, you can only be as a refugee. We were refugees, not what they call them here. As a refugee, you can only be a cook or a batwoman. A batwoman is somebody who looks after the officers. They polish their buttons, they keep their room clean, everything that they don't have anything to do with housework. Anyways, I said no. I say, I'm a registered nurse, and if I can't be a registered nurse in the army, let me go, and I'll be a registered nurse outside. And she was very understanding, and she said to me, come back in a week. So a week later, I went to the office, and she showed me a letter from the Home Office, which is the equivalent of the Pentagon. You know what the Pentagon is? You all do. And it said that she could try me out as a nurse, and if it worked out all right, they would take other refugees as nurses. So I was a guinea pig, and I was so happy. Later on, if you remember, I told you I wasn't able to go back to London. I was stationed in London with the army right at the back entrance to Buckingham Palace at Hyde Park Corner. It doesn't mean anything to you, but that is really the middle of London. You should know. Yes. So, but from there I was posted to different places before I got to London. And we had a Jewish forces club that when we were off duty, we used to go there, and we used to meet all the other military. There were the Free French and the Free Dutch and the Australians and the Palestinians, and every army under the sun met there. And the Canadians, of course. And I met somebody from Canada, and on my 21st birthday, we got engaged, and 6 months later, we got married. That's a long story, my wedding. It doesn't really belong here. So, a year later, I became pregnant. Oh, what I tell you now, it doesn't happen anymore. As I got married to a Canadian, I automatically became a Canadian citizen. So I put my Canada on my uniform. I have pictures if you want to see. And when I was pregnant, I got thrown out of the army, of course. And the Canadians would bring me to Canada, but only if it was in the first half of the pregnancy. In other words, the first 4.5 months. Otherwise, you had to stay in England and give birth in England. I could never understand that until later. After I came out of the army, I needed a job, and I went to Selfridge. I don't know any of you ever saw there was on TV a story, Mr. Selfridge.
Ein Department Store, also ein Kaufhaus. Ne?
Das ist wie Bloomingdale's.
Right.
Ja.
Der englische
Right.
Bloomingdale's.
And they hired me to take phone-in orders. You know, phone
Ein Telefon,
orders. Yeah.
Bestellungen.
Because nobody saw me that I was pregnant or whatever. But I was lucky because they got me on a boat within 6 months. And in England, what you saw all over, loose lips sink ships. That was the motto. I couldn't even tell my husband that I was leaving and that where I'm leaving from. Everything had to be secret because you never knew if you were talking to a spy or what was happening. You couldn't trust anybody. It really was difficult. And so I got notice that I was leaving.
Ganz kurz, Hannah, habt ihr es verstanden? Loose lips, sink ships. Also wenn jemand zu viel plaudert, zu viel redet, kann es sein, dass er ohne es merkt Geheimnisse verrät, vielleicht an einen Spion. Und der kann das dann wieder für das gegnerische Militär verwenden und dadurch können die zum Beispiel Schiffe versenken oder Bombenattacken machen. Ne? Also jeder muss da aufpassen, was er sagt, damit es nicht der Feind erfährt.
Thank you, that explained it. Yes, thank you. I couldn't do it as well. Not German. Where was I?
So you went on the ship to Canada?
Oh yes. So I had to go to the committee and tell them that I was leaving, and they were so good. Firstly, from the Canadian Red Cross, I got a layout for the baby, and I got a layout from the committee, and a layout from friends and eyewitnesses, and so I arrived with a trunk full of 3 layers, and my mother-in-law wouldn't let me open it. She was so superstitious. She said, "You leave it there till the baby's born, then I'll wash everything." So I'm not superstitious. Anyways, we got to Scotland, and there was a storm, and they couldn't bring the small boats to the boat. So they had to take all the people and take them to Glasgow, to a poorhouse. That was the only place where they could keep us all together. And these were long rooms like this, from wall to window, with one bed next to the other, and a fireplace at each end. And the next day they brought us back again to where the ship was. It was the original Ile-de-France, which had been changed inside. They had bunks like this because they were carrying troops. They were taking flyers, Air Force people back to Canada for a rest, and then they bring them back again. And at 10 o'clock at night, all of a sudden the engines started, and there was a storm, and but we got out. But I went back to my cabin, and on the way to the cabin I got sick, and they took me to the hospital, and in the hospital were all pregnant women, and some of them had children, so they had them in bed with them. It was horrendous. But what I want to point out was this: I'm deeply religious, and there was what would you call them? Nicht Catholic, katholisch, evangelisch.
Yeah, evangelisch.
An evangelist who used to come and visit me every day. Sat on my bed and we talked, and he was telling me, I call him a priest.
Priester.
Okay.
Yeah, priester.
Pastor.
Yeah, pastor.
Yeah, pastor. And he was telling me that he was going back to Canada. He had 2 children, and his wife had died, and he had to place his children somewhere to be looked after. I said, but surely they wouldn't send you back. You need to look after your children. He says, oh no. He said, I will place them the boys need me more. So there were people, they were really, my own rabbi from my hometown, from England during the war, they sent a shipload of men to Australia. And my rabbi at the time must have been, he was an old man. And he didn't have to go. And he said the same thing. The boys need me. He brought them over and he came back.
Hannah, it's very unpolite, I know, but I just would like to interrupt you. So you were able to escape on the boat to Canada? So where you started your new family?
Yeah, but we had a terrible storm, and the outside Canada, outside Halifax, was a minefield.
Yeah.
And we also had all around us a convoy, boats that came with us, that were protecting us. And finally, the following day, the pilot was able to come through the minefield to guide our boat into Halifax. And they took me upstairs, and once I was upstairs, I wasn't seasick anymore. That is the whole thing. Any one of you ever been seasick? You know, so, and there's another one. You know what it is. When you see land, it's finished.
Yeah.
It is really a terrible thing. Then I came to Canada. Well, I'm going to go jumping now.
Yes, the thing is, so we know that you came to Canada and then you were able to start your family in Canada. Would it be okay for you if you kind of stop at this point with your life, so that the students can now ask you questions to the part of your life which you told us, so when you were young, because we just have like 20 minutes left.
Yes,
and
this is wonderful.
Yeah,
Yes.
because this, I think, because we stopped now at the point where Hannah really escaped the war. She was able to create a new life in Canada, but now it's the time for you to ask questions about the life you heard so far. So please, very loud, Gunnar.
So I used to live in London.
Yeah, stand up
I used to live in London, and I liked it there a lot. What was your favorite city? London or
Yeah.
Canada?
Gunnar would like to know, because he once lived in London, what of all the cities you lived in so far, which is your or was your favorite city to live?
London.
Did you have to, did you pray a lot when you were scared?
Did you pray a lot during the war, for example, on the train when you were scared? Did you pray?
To this day, I pray. I pray. You're going to laugh if I tell you. When I go to bed, I say my child's prayer in German. And then I add all the things that I want to, you know. I constantly talk. I live alone, so I have no one to talk to, the walls. So I talk to God. When I leave the house, I say, please bring me back safe. When I come back, I say thank you. But all in German. So this is, some people laugh, but it's company.
Next question, Philipp, laut.
Kann ich auf Deutsch stellen?
Ja.
Hast du heutzutage noch deutsche Freunde?
Do you have German friends? So in these today, do you have German
Yes.
friends?
Yeah, let me explain that. And I'm glad you brought that up. In the 1900s, my mother got out to Chile, as I told you, and I was visiting her. And at that time, she was in the old age home of the Jewish congregation, because she had for like 28 years a housekeeper. And the housekeeper got old and sick. So she couldn't look after mother anymore. And I hired somebody else, and then my friends wrote and said, please come and see what's with your mother. And then I saw that I took her to the doctor, she was undernourished. She had cooked everything in water, nothing had any substance to the food that she gave her. So I said, this is no good. So that's when I put her into that home. And she had a private nurse for day and for night. And it was wonderful there. And that's where she lived until she was one month short of 101. So, wait, just a minute.
But so Philip wanted to know whether you have German friends.
Okay, let me get to that. It's all. I met somebody who came from Germany that went to the office of the congregation, and she was studying for her doctorate. And they sent her, she wanted to interview my mother, or people from our hometown. And she went to the office and they sent her to the home. And I was there. And that woman came in, and there was a young woman, and she wanted to interview her. And mother was at the time 92 years old. And I told her, I said, no way will I let you interview my mother. Not at 92, I don't want her to remember all the bad things. And I said, if you want to interview me, that is fine. So we became friends, and she interviewed me, and I saw her the next year, and she brought me a tape where the interview had been on the German radio. And then I said to her, I said, how is it that small towns invite the survivors and Bochum never does anything? So she brought that back to Germany, and they formed a group calling Erinnern für die Zukunft. And they worked for us. I mean, they didn't work for us. They wanted to bring us on a trip. We wanted to see who survived. We wanted to see who from our congregation was still alive. People came from all over the world. Okay? Now, this Erinnern für die Zukunft, who were they? They were professors of the university, they were doctors, they were townspeople. Everybody joined this group. And so we went there, and the first thing they asked me, would you speak in the school? And they told me the school. I said, oh, the one they threw me out of. That's fine, I'll speak there. And they brought me back 2 more times. So I was 3 times speaking to German schools in Germany. And I became friends with some of the professors, and we still correspond. We still are very close. So that is your answer to if I made friends. Because they were born after the war, so I knew they weren't any Nazis.
So many more questions. I think first was Belal, Laut.
Did anyone who you knew was like that person actually a spy? Like anyone who you knew was a spy? No?
Lenny?
Did you have non-Jewish family? Yeah.
Non-Jewish family?
Yeah. No.
Non-Jewish friends?
No, non-Jewish parts of your family. Like, were both of your parents?
Were
Jewish?
both of your parents Jewish?
Yes.
Yeah, both of them.
Yes.
Done.
I have a family tree hanging in my apartment. Started in 1790. 1790.
Yeah. Okay, then Katharina.
Wie viele Geschwister hatten Sie?
Did you have any siblings?
No.
Anna?
Mit wie vielen Jahren wussten Sie, was wirklich los war?
How old were you when you really knew what happened in Germany? So about the Holocaust. How old were you when you knew?
Well, we heard it towards the end of when the world heard it. We suspected it because we had been there. We knew on people who came out told us. You know, if you had a lot of money, everybody had a number for the American consulate, and they used to take. They had like a quota for the year, and we were given numbers, and our numbers would have come up in 5 years. So without that number, you couldn't anyway. I'll tell you something else. When I wanted to come over from Canada here,
To the US.
I still went on the German quota because they said where you were born, it doesn't matter what nationality you have. But there was nobody waiting anymore on the German quota.
Dann Julia.
How long were you in the British military?
How long were you in the British military? How many years or months?
3 years.
3 years. Okay. Thomas?
How long were you on the child transport?
How long were you on the child transport? How many days or weeks? How long did the train need take from when you started
Yeah,
and
I
when you
know.
arrived?
A couple of days. Because it's just, a couple of days.
Liam?
Where in Canada did you live?
Montreal.
Okay.
That's where my boys were born.
Kira?
How many kids were on the child transport?
150.
150.
What was your first impression of London?
At the time, it was wonderful. But then years ago, I went back with my mother, and everything seemed so small. Oxford was so small. And you come from New York with all those skyscrapers.
Inga?
With which year did you know you want to study medicine, and was there a specific
I was always
reason why?
fascinated by it. I would say about 15, 16 years.
Did you do anything where you were fascinated about, and you're like, oh, I want to do this again?
Did you do anything where you were fascinated about and thought, I would like to do this again?
Maybe help someone?
Help someone? That's why you wanted to?
I'll tell you something. I was a nurse. And then when I left out what happened to me afterwards, when you stopped me. Later when I had children, I couldn't be a nurse anymore because the hours didn't I couldn't leave the kids home alone at night, and in the morning I had to be there to see them off to school, so I went back to the university and took a few more credits and became a social worker. Okay, and while I was in Chile, 5 years, I went to college and I became an accountant, and that's when I was in the United States.